They say some lives are written like novels, full of twists, heartbreaks, unexpected triumphs, and legendary moments. But few lives feel as cinematic as George Clooney's. The man the world sees today, the charming actor, the activist, the humanitarian, the Hollywood icon, was not always destined for the spotlight. In fact, if you knew his beginnings, you might have bet against him ever making it at all. Because before the fame, before the awards, before the humanitarian missions and billion-dollar ventures, George Clooney was just a kid in Kentucky. A boy with a crooked smile, struggling grades, and a hidden battle with a mysterious illness that nearly silenced him before he could even speak to the world. But destiny has a funny way of testing those it has big plans for. And that's where our story begins. Before we dive deep, don't forget, this is only the start of George Clooney's unforgettable journey. If you love stories of resilience, reinvention, and raw human ambition, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear will make you see George Clooney in a way you never have before. Picture it. May 6, 1961, Lexington, Kentucky. A baby boy is born into a family that's no stranger to the spotlight. His father, Nick Clooney, was a respected news anchor and TV host. His aunt, Rosemary Clooney, one of the most beloved singers of her generation. Music, media, and the hum of bright lights were in his blood. But George's early years were far from glamorous. When he was in middle school, something strange happened. George suddenly couldn't control his face. Half of it froze, his speech slurred, his smile disappeared. Doctors diagnosed him with Bell's palsy. For a year, young George hid from the world, terrified of being laughed at. But instead of letting shame consume him, he fought back in the most unexpected way. He learned to laugh at himself first. He became the class clown, the boy who could turn his pain into comedy before anyone else got the chance. That coping mechanism, turning scars into stories, would become one of his greatest strengths as an actor.
But acting wasn't his dream. Not at first. George Clooney wanted to play baseball. In fact, he was so determined he even tried out for the Cincinnati Reds. He didn't make the team. His dreams of the big leagues ended before they began. Yet failure, as George would later say, is often life's way of pointing you toward where you truly belong. And little did he know, Hollywood was waiting. George Clooney packed his car, grabbed what little money he had, and drove west to California. Not with confidence, not with a safety net, just with the stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, he could make something of himself. But Hollywood is a cruel teacher. For years, George was the guy who couldn't quite land the role. He auditioned endlessly, working odd jobs to survive. He sold women's shoes. He cut tobacco. He even worked construction. Anything to keep chasing that elusive dream. When he did land acting gigs, they were small, often humiliating. One-off appearances on forgettable TV shows. He spent nearly a decade stuck in guest roles, always on the edge of something bigger, but never breaking through. There were nights George Clooney would sleep in his car, days when rejection piled up so high it felt like the world was laughing at him. Imagine it. Your family back home is famous. Your aunt is a legend. And you? You're scraping by, waiting tables and collecting better luck next time slips from casting directors. But here's where Clooney's story gets interesting. He never gave up. He treated every small role like it mattered. He studied scripts obsessively. He learned from failure after failure. And in the shadows of obscurity, he sharpened his craft. Hidden gem fact number 1. Before becoming a Hollywood superstar, George once starred in a terrible 1987 horror movie called Return to Horror High. The film bombed, but years later Clooney laughed about it, calling it one of the best learning experiences of his life. By the early 1990s, George had earned a reputation, not as a star, but as a dependable working actor. He was cast in TV pilots that never got picked up. He joined shows that disappeared after a season. But then came the role that changed everything.
It was 1994. NBC launched a medical drama called ER. Clooney was cast as Dr. Doug Ross, the charming, flawed, womanizing pediatrician with a heart of gold. The show exploded into a cultural phenomenon, and Clooney, after years of scraping by, was suddenly on every magazine cover in America. Women adored him, men respected him, and critics, they couldn't get enough. Overnight, George Clooney went from struggling nobody to household name. But here's the twist. Success didn't make him comfortable, it made him restless. Clooney feared becoming a TV star trapped in one role forever. He wanted more. He wanted movies. He wanted control of his career. So in the middle of his ER fame, when most actors would cling to the steady paycheck, Clooney made a bold move. He walked away. That decision would change not just his career, but his life. Leaving ER was a gamble. George Clooney had fame, money, and millions of fans. But he wanted more than comfort. He wanted legacy. So he leapt into Hollywood films. At first, it worked. His charm and sharp looks landed him roles in movies like From Dusk to Dawn and One Fine Day. Suddenly, Clooney wasn't just a TV doctor. He was a leading man. His face was plastered on billboards, his name on theater marquees. But then came 1997. A role that should have cemented his stardom nearly destroyed it instead. George Clooney was cast as Batman. Batman and Robin promised to be huge. But when the film hit theaters, it was a disaster. Critics tore it apart. Fans mocked it. Clooney's Batman was labeled the worst in history.
For years, he apologized publicly for that movie, even joking that he destroyed the franchise. Behind the humor, though, was pain. Clooney could feel Hollywood's judgment pressing down. In an industry that forgives slowly, one flop can end a career. But George Clooney was no stranger to failure, and instead of hiding, he pivoted. He sought out riskier, smarter projects. He teamed up with daring directors. In 1998, he starred in Steven Soderbergh's Out of Sight alongside Jennifer Lopez, a stylish crime thriller that reminded everyone Clooney wasn't just a pretty face. He could act, really act. Then came Three Kings, O Brother, Where Art Thou? And eventually, the film that made him a global superstar, Ocean's 11. The 2001 remake, directed by Soderbergh, brought together an all-star cast: Brad Pitt, Matt Damon, Julia Roberts. But it was Clooney at the center, cool, witty, unshakably confident. Danny Ocean wasn't just a role, it was the role George Clooney was born to play. Audiences adored him. Hollywood forgave him. And suddenly, Clooney had done the impossible. He had turned a career-killing disaster into a stepping stone towards superstardom. Hidden gem fact number 2. George Clooney turned down a $15 million paycheck to star in a romantic comedy because he felt the script wasn't good enough. He believed protecting his reputation was more valuable than money. But Clooney wasn't content just being in front of the camera. Deep down, he wanted something else: control, a voice in what stories got told. And that desire would push him to become more than just an actor. It would turn him into one of Hollywood's most respected directors and producers.
By the early 2000s, George Clooney had the world's attention. But he wasn't chasing fame anymore. He was chasing meaning. So he took a leap most actors fear. He stepped behind the camera. His directorial debut, Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, was strange, bold, and unconventional. Critics didn't quite know what to make of it, but Clooney had proven something. He wasn't afraid to take risks. Then came Good Night and Good Luck, a black-and-white drama about journalist Edward R. Murrow's fight against Senator Joseph McCarthy. Most studios thought it was too serious, too political, too old-fashioned to work. Clooney not only directed it, he co-wrote and starred in it. The film stunned Hollywood. It earned 6 Academy Award nominations. Clooney suddenly wasn't just a star, he was a serious filmmaker. And then another milestone. In 2006, George Clooney won an Oscar, Best Supporting Actor for Syriana. He had gained nearly 30 pounds for the role, injuring his spine in the process. The injury left him in excruciating pain, even leaking spinal fluid. But Clooney endured it, and his performance was unforgettable. Hidden gem fact number 3. Clooney once said the pain from his Syriana injury was so unbearable he briefly considered ending his life. Yet he pushed through, turning agony into artistry, a reminder of his resilience. As the awards piled up, Clooney could have lived in the comfort of Hollywood success. But his focus shifted outward, beyond the cameras, beyond the glitz, toward the world. He used his fame to shine light on crises few celebrities dared to touch. Clooney became an outspoken activist for Darfur, raising awareness about genocide in Sudan. He co-founded Not on Our Watch, a humanitarian organization focused on global human rights. In 2010, after the devastating Haiti earthquake, Clooney organized a telethon that raised over $70 million in relief. Later, he helped launch the Satellite Sentinel project, using satellites to track human rights abuses in Africa.
And he didn't just give money or speeches, he showed up. Clooney traveled to war zones. He was even arrested in Washington, D.C. during a protest at the Sudanese embassy. A Hollywood star in handcuffs, not for scandal, but for justice. He once said, "You never really learn much from hearing yourself talk, but listening to others, that's where the wisdom is." This balance, Hollywood glamour on one side, gritty activism on the other, made Clooney more than just a celebrity. He became a symbol of using fame for something bigger. But even as he carried the weight of global causes, his personal life remained in the spotlight, and soon it would take a turn that shocked the world. For decades, George Clooney carried a reputation that seemed impossible to shake. He was Hollywood's ultimate bachelor, the man who vowed never to marry again, the star who once joked that he'd rather be struck by lightning than walk down the aisle a second time. Tabloids painted him as untouchable. Every red carpet, every interview, someone asked, "Will George ever settle down?" And the answer was always the same: a charming smile, a clever dodge, never a yes. But life, once again, had a twist in store. In 2013, George was introduced to Amal Alamuddin, a brilliant Lebanese-British barrister specializing in international law and human rights. Amal wasn't an actress, wasn't chasing fame. She was a world-class lawyer fighting for justice on a global stage. From the moment George met her, everything shifted. He later admitted he knew within minutes that she was the one. The notorious bachelor, the man who swore he'd never marry, was suddenly planning a proposal. And in true Clooney fashion, he did it with style. He cooked her dinner at home, hid the ring in a drawer, and nervously waited for the right moment. Amal said yes. Their wedding in Venice was the stuff of dreams, Glamorous, star-studded, yet deeply personal. And for George, it marked a rebirth. He wasn't just a Hollywood icon anymore. He was a husband, a partner. Then came another surprise. In 2017, George and Amal welcomed twins, Ella and Alexander. The man who once swore off fatherhood was suddenly a doting dad, changing diapers, singing lullabies, and joking that he'd finally met his match in 2 toddlers.
Hidden gem fact number 4. George Clooney once gave 14 of his closest friends a suitcase, each stuffed with $1 million in cash. His explanation, "If I get hit by a bus, you're all taken care of." It was generosity on a scale that stunned even Hollywood. But Amal brought something else to George's life: purpose. Together, they became a powerhouse couple, blending Hollywood influence with legal and humanitarian activism. Amal continued defending human rights cases, while George used his platform to amplify her work. Suddenly, Clooney wasn't just remembered for playing Danny Ocean or winning Oscars. He was redefining what it meant to be a global citizen, a husband, and a father. And just when people thought his story had settled into calm waters, Clooney found yet another way to surprise the world: by stepping into business. A move that would make him not just famous, not just respected, but a billionaire. George Clooney had conquered Hollywood. He had Oscars, global fame, and a family he adored. But he wasn't finished surprising the world. In 2013, alongside friends Rand Gerber and Mike Meldman, Clooney co-founded a tequila brand, Casamigos. What started as a passion project, simply making tequila they personally loved to drink, exploded into a global sensation. Bars, clubs, and collectors couldn't get enough of it. 4 years later, in 2017, Casamigos was sold to Diageo for up to $1 billion. Yes, $1 billion. Overnight, Clooney went from movie star to business mogul. Hidden gem fact number 5. Clooney didn't even plan to sell Casamigos. The deal came only after the company grew so rapidly that they couldn't keep up with demand. As he joked later, "We never thought anyone would drink it except us." But unlike many who chase wealth, Clooney kept perspective. He poured much of his energy into philanthropy. Together with Amal, they launched the Clooney Foundation for Justice, focusing on human rights and accountability worldwide. He donated millions to causes from Syrian refugees to natural disaster relief. He quietly funded schools in Lebanon for Syrian refugee children. And he continued to use his fame as a megaphone, not for gossip, not for scandal, but for change. Even his business success reflected that mindset. Clooney wasn't just building wealth, he was building impact. Meanwhile, his career continued to evolve. Clooney took fewer acting roles, but chose them carefully. He directed ambitious projects, acted in films like The Midnight Sky, and produced stories he believed mattered, always balancing entertainment with depth. By this stage of his life, George Clooney had become something rare in Hollywood, a man admired not just for talent, but for integrity. He once said, "I had to stop going to auditions where I was told I wasn't good enough. The secret is, you only have to succeed once." That one success had multiplied into many: actor, director, producer, activist, entrepreneur, husband, father, philanthropist. Each role more surprising, more layered than the last. And yet, Clooney's story isn't over. Far from it. He continues to shape his legacy, not through bigger paychecks or flashier headlines, but through the quiet power of influence. Which leads us to the final chapter: the man George Clooney is today and the vision he carries for tomorrow. Today, George Clooney is more than a movie star. He's a symbol, a reminder that failure doesn't have to define you, that reinvention is always possible, that true success is measured not by fame or fortune, but by impact. He spends much of his time at home with Amal and their twins, balancing fatherhood with filmmaking and philanthropy. He continues to direct and act on his own terms in projects that speak to him. Hollywood no longer defines him. He defines Hollywood. What makes Clooney extraordinary isn't just that he's won awards, built empires, and married one of the most brilliant women on earth. It's that through it all, he's never lost his humor, never lost his humility, never lost the Kentucky kid who learned to laugh at himself when life tried to break him.
Think about his journey. A boy struck by Bell's palsy who could barely smile. A failed baseball player turned shoe salesman. An actor rejected for nearly a decade. A Batman mocked by the world. And yet, he rose. Again and again. And along the way, he gave. To friends, to strangers, to causes that had no voice. He used the very spotlight he once feared losing to light up the darkest corners of the world. George Clooney's story reminds us of something timeless. Success is not one big break. It is the accumulation of risks, resilience, reinventions, and the courage to never settle. And maybe that's the real magic of his life. Not the fame, not the fortune, but the lesson that no matter how many times you stumble, you can rewrite your story. Because if George Clooney could turn rejection into reinvention, pain into purpose, and fame into fuel for justice, what's stopping you from doing the same? This has been the unforgettable life of George Clooney, a man who proves that sometimes the best stories aren't written on a script, they're lived. If this journey inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Drop a comment with your favorite Clooney moment or the lesson from his story that moved you most. Because stories like this, they're meant to spark something inside us all. And who knows, maybe your story is the next one the world will never forget.